It was supposed to be a morning of peace. The first week of school had just begun, and children gathered with their families inside the Annunciation Catholic Church in South Minneapolis. The stained glass windows glowed with soft hues of blue, green, and gold as sunlight streamed through, painting the pews with holy light. The organ hummed in the background, voices of children rising in song, shy at first, then strong and proud. Parents smiled from the back of the sanctuary, whispering to one another about how quickly their children were growing. Teachers stood watch, proud to see another year begin with faith and tradition. It was an image of innocence, the kind of scene a community clings to when it needs hope the most. And then, everything changed. The sharp crack of breaking glass sliced through the melody. A thunderous sound followed, rattling the very walls of the church. Screams erupted as chaos filled the sanctuary. Children dropped to the ground. Parents threw themselves across their sons and daughters. Wooden pews splintered as bullets tore through them, shards scattering across the floor. The scent of incense was suddenly drowned by the acrid smell of gunpowder. Gunfire echoed through the holy space, deafening, relentless. 2 children, just 8 and 10 years old, never rose again. 17 others lay wounded, 14 of them children, bleeding in the pews where moments earlier they had been praying. And behind it all was one name, Robin Westman. Who was this 23-year-old? Why had they come back to the very place they once knew so well, carrying a rifle, a shotgun, and a pistol? What lived inside their mind that could turn a sanctuary into a slaughterhouse? The answers lay hidden, not only in broken glass and empty pews, but in a trail of writings, recordings, and scars that stretched back years. For many in Minneapolis, the name Westman was not unfamiliar. Robin had once been a student at Annunciation School. They had walked the same halls, sat in the same wooden desks, and bowed their head in the same sanctuary they would later drench in terror. Teachers remembered Robin as quiet, perhaps distant at times, but never the kind to raise their voice, let alone raise a weapon. Their mother had worked at the school as a secretary for 5 years before retiring in 2021. She was remembered as warm, helpful, a fixture in the church office. Parishioners who knew her spoke with disbelief when they heard her child's name. But Robin had changed. In 2019, they had legally altered their name from Robert to Robin and began to identify as female. Friends described struggles with belonging, feelings of rejection, and a deep anger at institutions they once turned to for stability. On the outside, Robin's life appeared uneventful, even invisible. No serious criminal record, no public outbursts, no long list of warning signs. But behind closed doors, a storm brewed. Sketchbooks filled with violent doodles. Online searches filled with dark obsessions. A growing list of grievances scribbled into notebooks. By August 2025, that storm was ready to break. Hours before the shooting, Robin left behind a disturbing breadcrumb trail for the world to see. On YouTube, several videos appeared. In them, weapons were laid out on the floor, a rifle, a shotgun, a pistol, all polished already. Beside them sat a stack of handwritten pages. The camera panned slowly over their contents. Slurs, hateful slogans, scrawled sketches of church pews, and crude maps of a sanctuary. One phrase stood out, bold and sharp across the page. "Where is your God?" Another page showed a list of names and dates, though none were explained. There were drawings of children's faces, exaggerated, almost cartoonish, yet haunting in their context. On the firearms themselves, investigators would later find words etched in scratched handwriting, anti-Semitic and anti-immigrant insults, anti-Catholic phrases, and even political messages like "Kill Donald Trump." It was as though Robin had turned every surface, paper, metal, glass, into a canvas of rage. For most viewers, the videos looked like the unhinged rantings of a troubled mind. But for Robin, they were more than that. They were a declaration, a warning, and a plan. What if those scribbles were not just thoughts but instructions? What if those maps were not doodles, but a blueprint? The stage was set. All that remained was to carry out what had already been written. The morning sun was warm as families filed into the church, unaware of the storm gathering just outside. Robin Westman stood across the street, dressed in black. In their hands, the weapons they had so carefully displayed online. At 8:30 a.m., as the congregation bowed their heads in prayer, Robin opened fire. Bullets ripped through stained glass windows, shattering saints and angels into shards that rained down on worshippers. The organist froze at the keys, his hands trembling as chaos unfolded. Children screamed as they dove beneath pews. Parents wrapped their arms around small bodies, trying desperately to shield them from the storm of bullets. "Get down!" voices cried, but the shots kept coming, relentless, echoing like thunder trapped inside stone walls. A 10-year-old survivor later whispered through tears, "It was right beside me. We waited, then we went to the gym." 2 children would never make it out alive. 17 others, 14 children and 3 elderly parishioners, were hit. Blood pooled across the tiled floor as cries for help filled the sanctuary. And still, Robin kept firing. What had driven them to aim at children? To shoot through the windows of a place they once called home? The answer lay in the twisted motives that investigators would uncover only after the guns fell silent. In the hours after the massacre, the FBI descended on Robin's apartment and online trail. What they found was chilling. The manifesto revealed a tangled web of hate. Anti-Semitic rants filled the pages, alongside anti-Christian venom and furious slurs against immigrants. There were rambling passages about politics, including threats against national leaders, and apocalyptic phrases about revenge. But there was more. Robin's connection to Annunciation ran deep. They had studied there as a child, walked past its altar, recited prayers under the same roof. Their mother had been part of its daily rhythm. Somewhere along the way, those ties had curdled into resentment. Perhaps it was a sense of rejection. Perhaps it was loneliness, magnified by online echo chambers that fed their rage. Perhaps it was a mind unraveling, desperate for significance in the worst possible way. So was the shooting a political act, fueled by extremist ideology? Or was it something more personal, a vendetta against a place that once represented belonging but had become, in Robin's mind, a symbol of rejection? The answer may never be fully known. But what is certain is that Robin returned to a place of faith not to pray, but to destroy. The massacre ended in sudden silence. Police raced toward the church, their sirens wailing through the quiet neighborhoods of South Minneapolis. SWAT teams surrounded the building, preparing for a standoff. But before they could engage, the gunfire stopped. Behind the church, Robin Westman turned one of their weapons on themselves. The 23-year-old shooter was dead before law enforcement made contact. Inside, the sanctuary looked like a battlefield. Blood on the pews, shattered glass glittering on the floor, abandoned hymnals scattered among bullet casings. 2 children were gone forever. 17 others, many of them gravely wounded, were rushed to hospitals across the city. Doctors worked frantically, performing surgeries through the night. By morning, officials confirmed that all the wounded would survive. A small comfort in the face of immeasurable loss. Mayor Jacob Fry spoke through tears. These kids were literally praying, "Don't let hate shape our response." But for parents clutching empty beds at home, words fell hollow. For a community that had trusted its sanctuary as a place of safety, nothing felt sacred anymore. And the question still lingered. What comes next? As the news spread, Minneapolis fell into mourning. Vigils lit up street corners as candles burned in memory of the 2 children whose lives had been stolen. Outside the church, a sea of flowers, notes, and teddy bears grew larger each day. A heartbreaking monument to innocence lost. Parishioners gathered to weep together, to pray, to ask why. Parents gripped their children tighter. Teachers cried quietly in empty classrooms. Across the nation, leaders condemned the attack. Calls for unity grew louder. The Pope himself sent condolences, calling for healing and an end to hatred. But alongside grief came anger. Anger that such hatred could thrive unnoticed. Anger that weapons of war could so easily find their way into young hands. Anger that a familiar face had become an enemy within. Still, amid the grief, resilience stirred. The school vowed to reopen. Survivors vowed to recover. Parents vowed to fight back against hate. And yet, in every vigil, in every whispered prayer, one question remained. In the shadow of this darkness, can hope truly be found? The story of Robin Westman forces a nation to look inward. It is a story of missed signs, angry sketches, hateful posts, strange videos that seemed alarming but went unnoticed until it was too late. It is a story of isolation turned to rage, of silence that grew louder until it exploded in violence. 2 children lost forever. 17 others bearing scars that may never fade. A community broken, a nation reminded once again of the fragility of its sanctuaries. Could this have been prevented? Could someone have seen the clues, stepped in, spoken up before bullets tore through stained glass? And what can be done now, not just in Minneapolis, but everywhere, to stop hate before it strikes again? The answers are not simple, but the questions cannot be ignored. This is the story of Robin Westman, a mind consumed by hate, a life swallowed by darkness, and 2 young souls stolen too soon. It is also the story of resilience, a city that lit candles instead of surrendering to fear, a school that reopened its doors, families that, even in grief, refused to let hatred define their community. The tragedy left wounds that will never fully heal, but it also left a warning. A reminder that hate festers in silence, and that vigilance, compassion, and unity are the only weapons that can stop it. So ask yourself, what would you have done in that moment? How can we protect our children, our communities, our sacred spaces, without losing our humanity? The story ends in silence, a silence for the 2 children who will never grow up, for the prayers cut short, for the families left behind. But in that silence lies a lesson. Hate can shatter glass, splinter wood, and take lives, but it must never be allowed to destroy compassion, justice, or hope.